Okay, I've seen a lot of strange things this week. I interviewed a singing pig, don't you forget. But this takes the cake. It is the world's largest cucumber slicer. What is going on? This is absolutely ridiculous, and we have so many questions. Matthias Horstman, the first question I have is why?
Why? Well, Hendrick's gin is from Scotland, and it's actually curiously infused with rose and cucumber. So we try and add a little bit of the unusual to everything we do.
Hey there, welcome to Table to Stage. Jordan here. So when the Hendrick's Gin Grand Garnisher rolled into St. Louis back in 2018, the crew at KSDK News had a lot of questions. And really, wouldn't we all in that situation? What they didn't have was today's guest to give them the answers. So Joey Marsocci is the creative visionary behind Grymm Studios, and when Hendrick's Gin was looking for a steampunk-inspired gin garnisher, Joey was their go-to designer. Joey's alter ego, Dr. Grymm, has since retired, but Joey's work in creature suits and cosplay, props, and more has a look and a feel that isn't easily ignored or replicated, actually. We really had a great conversation. Now, if you enjoy hearing the conversations on Table to Stage, I hope you'll take a few minutes to leave a rating or a review of the pod on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. Every rating makes it easier for others to find the show, and it really helps to spread the word about the amazing creators that come on the pod. All right, so here's Joey Marsocci of Grymm Studios.
I'm a Rhode Island native.
Oh, okay.
I lived there for most of my life. And then I moved to California to go to college.
Okay.
I went to California Institute of the Arts, which is the Disney-founded college.
Oh, all right.
I originally went there for animation, and then eventually transformed that into majoring in theme park design.
Oh,
so
wow.
that was kind of where my background came from. I probably spent my entire life saying, I want to be an animator and I want to do voiceovers. And I did get to do a little bit of everything there.
Yeah.
That school, has this creative wealth in it of, fine art and film and music and dance and theater.
Yeah.
So everything is encased there. So I was able to work with a lot of great people. But once I got there, I realized that, animation isn't what I want to do. I don't want to sit there and ink other people's drawings for hours. I'm a storyteller.
Yeah.
And I was a sculptor. I could make 3D art. So I really wanted to build worlds.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, if you're going to spend that much time doing something, wouldn't it be awesome if you could just walk into it?
That'd be pretty incredible. Yeah.
So that's kind of it was a drastic change, but everything that I learned in animation and film was then transferred over into storytelling for theme park design.
Yeah.
So
wow.
Yeah. So it was. I
didn't realize that was even something you could study in college. It never even occurred to me.
I didn't either. And that's the funny thing is that, I've always loved theme parks, but it was like, in my mind, it was like, oh yeah, they just spring up and that's that. Right. Like it's not something that people study. But back in the early 70s at CalArts, they had that as a major, as theme park design. And the students were actually assisting in developing and building what would be Epcot Center in Florida.
Oh, wow.
And then after Epcot was built, they shut down the program and they just focused on animation. So it just kind of went away. And a few friends of mine who are also big theme park nerds, we kind of got together and said, hey, can we bring this back? Like the professors who work at and teach at CalArts are old animation people. They're people who worked directly with Walt Disney.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
My mentor when I was there, his name was Bob Winquist, which is not a name anybody really knows. But day one, he taught the design class, and he was telling us his vast resume, and his resume included, he designed Oz. He designed the Tide logo. He designed the Coke swirl. He designed he was the art director for A Clockwork Orange. And it's like, are you kidding me? And so he worked with Disney. Like, he designed Main Street in Disneyland. And his initials and name are in several places there. So having people like that and people who have been in the animation industry and worked with Warner Brothers, and it was just an amazing experience.
Yeah.
On top of that, the guests that would come in, people like Frank Oz or Tim Burton, and just to be able to grow from that. So when we realized that that was an option, me and my buddies got together and went to Bob and said, hey, could we learn this? Like, could this be an option? And he's like, yeah, let's make that happen again.
Wow.
So they did. And since I left, I believe it's still being taught there now, as well as puppetry. You can get a master's in puppetry there. There's all these different like things that artists went to them with to say, hey, we want to learn this.
Yeah.
And that's what was great about that school, is how open they were to just teaching art in all of its different phases and really introducing, new careers to people.
Now, haven't all the theme parks been built, though, at this point? I mean, Star Wars is now a theme park. Harry Potter's a theme park. What's left?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, but Avatar is just going to keep growing, because they have that
93 films scheduled or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So they'll keep building Animal Kingdom into the rest of Avatar, most likely. But that's the thing with theme parks, is that if there was a lull there I'd say in the 90s, where, Disney was at the top and Universal was behind them. Mm-hmm. So they just stayed there and they didn't really change anything. Meanwhile, Universal is now building up their parks to be better than Disney. Yeah. So there's a race there going on. And plus, I mean, there's theme parks all around the world that are just like, I remember I worked at a place called Gary Goddard Group for a while, and they were responsible for the Universal parks, but also just random parks around the world. Like, they were building a Hello Kitty park in Seoul, Korea. They were building a which never came to be, but a Wizard of Oz theme park in Kansas, which bad idea because tornadoes,
right?
But it was beautiful, but it's something that's going to keep growing.
Sure.
Just like, now they've got this huge installation for Star Wars. But Galaxy Edge is just, they opened it. They opened one ride out of 3 over the next 5 years. So those are still being developed, and then it will grow more. Meanwhile, all the sections of the park will start to grow, and so there is you may think like, oh, there's nothing else going to be built, but what about the next big blockbuster that comes up? And it's like, we need to make a park about that, So
it really is amazing with the creative level that goes into theme parks these days. I mean, when I was a kid, we'd go to Six Flags, and it was just roller coasters, which I love.
Yeah.
And that was about it. But now you go and it's an entire immersive experience that goes into it. And I guess that's the kind of thing that is now available at schools like that.
Yeah. I mean, definitely as far as the details. It's all about the little details. It's all about the nerds who love those details.
Right.
That's what they're flourishing on. They build this Harry Potter world, but spent so much money to make, Diagon Alley look the way it does in the film.
Right.
And then, continue on adding to it. I mean, you've got how many books to take from that you can make different rides. So, they're never going to stop building those, because I think, like with every, point in time where there's dark stuff going on, you need an escape.
Right.
And that's what those escapes are. They're just becoming more enriching, more detailed, and, feeding to, nerds who love it, but also families that didn't, people who didn't know they loved it, and they're like, oh, this is great.
But so before you head out to California, though, to go to study art, what was the trigger for you that got you into art? How did you become the kid that went to study art in college?
I would say, so I didn't know about CalArts until high school. One of my art teacher in high school actually went to CalArts, and that's how I found out about it. But before that, it's probably 2 things. It was Warner Brothers cartoons and the Muppets. So Jim Henson and people like Chuck Jones and Mel Blanc, and that was my childhood.
Yeah.
And so I knew I either wanted to go into puppets, voiceovers, or animation. And it was going to be one of those three. But at the time, there wasn't like a school for puppetry. There wasn't but animation there was. So I figured, well, I could do that. I love making characters and making stories, and I want to be a director. So that was kind of my goal. And when I got to high school, it was, when it's time to like getting close to pick a college, everybody's like, oh, you should go to RISD. And I'm like, no, I don't own enough black clothes to go to RISD. Now I do, but I didn't at the time. And I didn't want to like just do fine art. And, that wasn't me. It was a very like closed box. When I found out about CalArts, I was like, that's where I need to go.
Yeah.
So, 3,000 miles away, I applied to CalArts, and that was it. But the years leading up to it was really just, I want to be in entertainment, and I wasn't too sure about like, I don't want to act, like I'm super stage shy.
Okay.
But I outgrew that eventually, which we can talk about later, but I knew I wanted to be in entertainment in some way. So with CalArts and all the different things that make CalArts what it is, and you can talk to, hey, I need, when I was doing animation, when I started doing animation, I was just like, this is a lot. But there were so many collaborative outlets of, I want to work with this guy to do the music, and I want to work with, this woman to do dialect and voice work. And you just you could pull together this amazing crew of people. Yeah. So when it finally turned over into, I don't want to do animation. It's going to take 12 years to become a director if you were going to do that.
Yeah.
And it's not like I don't want to put in the hard work, but I want to put in the hard work to create something that's unique and different and not, I think 2D animation was at its height then.
Okay.
But it just wasn't, I found that it just wasn't what I wanted.
Yeah.
But I had this Pandora's box of creativity around me. So it's like, all right, so what do I want to do?
So, but I mean, Jim Henson and the Muppets and the WB animation, studying animation in school, the look and the feel of all that stuff is colorful and bright. And as you just alluded to, you're wearing all black now, and you've got a very different aesthetic that you lean into, and especially with steampunk, which is something I definitely want to talk about.
Sure.
So how did you go from Fozzie Bear and Kermit the Frog to the steampunk aesthetic? Where did you discover it, and how were you drawn to it?
So steampunk, as I fell into it, I had no idea that the word even existed probably until about 2007.
What does it even mean, really?
Well, that's kind of the thing, because everybody has its own definition of it. Where I'll go back to how I discovered the style was through reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Okay.
Or Journey to the Center of the Earth, or that style that was described, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. That style kind of always stuck with me. This kind of mad scientist, Victorian, beautiful scroll work and the luxury of it, but also, clockwork and steam trains and things like that. That aesthetic always was just, how the hell did they do that?
Yeah.
And that's basically where steampunk comes from. It comes from the writings of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, Mary Shelley, even Mark Twain. And those aesthetics, as I read them as a child, stuck with me. And when I would design in that style. Although, be it very dark for a kid, brains in jars and how they worked and things like that was something that I drew as a kid, and especially monsters, which we'll go into that too. But there was just something about that world that was fascinating to me, and you just want to know more, right? You want to know more. How does the steam train work? How does clockwork, and like, how does that all work?
Right.
So I was constantly reading books about it. That evolved into that style, which eventually was penned as the name steampunk somewhere in the 80s by an author. And I'd say 10, 15 years after that, it started to turn into a subculture. And that subculture was steampunk, and it started, I don't really know where it started, but a lot of it was going on in England at the time, and then I think it kind of washed over around
I remember
the world.
my first experience or exposure to, I guess what would be called steampunk was that terrible Will Smith movie.
Yes.
I don't remember what it was called.
Wild West.
Wild Wild West.
Yes. Which is a horrible movie, but the art style of the movie is actually what saves it.
But that's exactly what I remember about it, was that I hated the movie, but I loved the way it looked.
Right.
So was that sort of the introduction of that aesthetic to pop culture?
Yes.
And did it make it a rough transition?
It made it a rough transition because I think, because it was a horrible film, but the artists and the geeks who love the look of it, you know, it's like it wasn't coined as a steampunk film because because really the word wasn't being thrown around as much as it is now.
Right.
And, you know, there's always that. I mean, I spent probably 10 years, maybe a little bit longer, just doing steampunk. Okay. So that was my sole occupation, working in steampunk and going around and talking about it and what it is and what it isn't, which is taboo because, you know, some people feel like, oh, you can't put a label on it. Anything can be steampunk. Well, it can't.
Okay.
You know, and that was one of the things that with me, kind of getting ahead of myself, but, I was already designing in that style, and that style has to do with, you know, an alternative world where, you know, it's not gasoline, it's, you know, it's steam power.
Yeah.
Clockwork is more prevalent, and there are dirigibles, and there, you know, so all of that, sort of evolved then into a subculture where people then wanted to dress like that and make things like that and then have conventions like that. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And I think it attracts those people that, like myself as a kid, are fascinated by, you know, what happened with our technology and what if it didn't evolve into where it was, but just kept going in that other direction.
Right. What if the transistor had never been invented and we just stuck with gears?
Right. But, you know, really when it goes back to the literary masters who were writing things that, you know, you take The Time Machine by H.G. Wells.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of that from when he wrote it predicted as being correct in our world. And there's a huge fascination to that, you know, the submarine in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, how it was powered and what it was used for and the whole war essence to it. And, you know, that's something that translates into our world now.
Yeah.
So it's not really an escapism, but these conventions are so, I mean, people take it really seriously.
Yeah.
You know, and they love it. They live it. And
well, it's an art style that is not specifically just for art anymore. People live in that aesthetic now. People kind of carry it into their everyday lives.
Right. But that's the thing, is that it's an art style. And that's something that as I was touring and going to conventions and talking about it, that I found that, you know, when people would ask me originally, what is steampunk? And I'm like, it doesn't have a definition to it. It's, you know, it takes all the voices of the people who build this stuff to make it what it is.
Right.
But on the other side of that coin, it is an art movement. And as an art movement, there are certain aesthetics that make it what it is. And some people don't grasp that. Some people are just, oh, well, it's this. It's diesel punk. No, diesel punk is its own thing. And it's derived from,
never heard that before.
Really a time period.
Okay.
And what was used in that time period. So you can't just take gears and slap it on a toaster and say, oh, it's a steampunk toaster.
Right.
Some people think that's what it is. But really, it's a matter of, well, what is the functionality of it? Because it's form and function. That's what makes steampunk. So yeah, you could make something static that looks like it runs on gears and it lights up and it looks Victorian. And that's great. It's a prop. But there are people out there that are artists that I have worked with, doing my books, doing museum exhibits, that they make this stuff and it works. And that's fascinating.
So it's a
me.
functional art as well.
Yeah. It depends on the artist.
Yeah.
You know, so, but that's like that with any culture. If you take, Star Wars. And you have Star Wars conventions and Trekkie conventions, and they put a lot of time into their costumes and their props and what they do.
Yeah.
Some of them work, some of them don't. Most of the time they don't. Right. but it's, it connects them to that world. It tethers them to this world that they enjoy. And the nice thing about steampunk and why I think there's a huge age range to it is because kids love to learn about that stuff. You go to train museums, whatever. There's older people who work with steam engines and still do blacksmithing. And like that was something their father or grandfather did.
Right.
That, so the audience that steampunk attracts, there's no real age limit to it. Which makes it, something that different cultures, different people from different walks of life get attracted to it for their own reasons.
Yeah.
And because it falls into that Victorian time period, the aesthetic of that being, you can play around with it because you could have a, beautiful golden gilded, and you can have kind of dark and science fiction-y.
Right.
And that's where I fell into it. So, when you were talking about, not to backtrack, but you were asking about how did I get from colorful to dark? There was room for that there in the steampunk community. The first piece that I ever made that got recognized in the community before I even knew there was a word for it, was simply by accident. And it was a pun. It was basically, I was visiting my father, and, I said, "Hey, I got to go get my iPod out of the car." And he's like, "What?" And I said, "It's an iPod." He's like, "What's an iPod?" I'm like, "It's a thing that has music." And he's like, and he just pauses and he's like, "I as in EYE?" I'm like, "No, I as in I." And then it clicked on me. I was like, "Oh, I should make an iPod that, like, what would Dr. Frankenstein's iPod look like in that world?" So I created from my iPod very simply, well, kind of simply, but it was functional. It looked like it was brass and copper, and there was an eyeball in the center of it, and you use the eyeball as the trackball to it, and it had a magnifier that would come down.
Wow.
And then there was a stand for it that had a horn, so it was like a Victrola, and that was also the docking station to change it, and you could adjust the volume and everything right from it, but you could also wear it on your wrist as, so it was a whole bunch of different things.
That was a wearable thing?
Yeah. You could take it off and it had a leather band right on it, so you could just wear it. And I made it just as a joke, and I posted it on my website, on my blog, and I said, this is what this is, and I went to bed. And the next morning, it was on Boing Boing, and it was on like all these different media things as, this Dr. Frankenstein steampunk iPod, and it was everywhere.
Yeah.
And it just went across the internet within a week, 10,000 views. And it was just people contacting me about doing steampunk. And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So it was funny how I fell into it. But as a business person and as an artist that, I do lots of different things. It's whether they're sketches or graphic design or consulting on art projects. Steampunk was born in a certain way that it's like, there are people who want this thing. They want this in their hotel, in their restaurant. And it's still going that way. It's not like it hit the mainstream, because it certainly hasn't. It doesn't matter how many times you throw the word steampunk into the media, the majority of people still have no idea what it is.
Oh, sure. Right.
And I think that's how it's going to be, because as soon as you label it steampunk, as soon as you label anything, it alters its course of what it is. And on top of that, it makes it, if you just look at the word steampunk, that word kind of frightens people. So as I evolved into Dr. Grymm Laboratories, which is now Grymm Studios, I did more art pieces, and I would contact, or people would contact me and say, "Hey, I need this. Can you build this?" And that was with film, either people doing, independent films or whatever. They just wanted stuff. But the thing that I think made me different than a lot of makers out there at the time, my stuff was unique. It was definitely my style. It was not something to this day, you know, for as many steampunk artists that are out there, whether they're professional or they're hobbyists, no one replicates my stuff.
Huh.
And people do. Like, that's something like so I wrote a book. I was asked to write a book about steampunk, and I say write in air quotes because it was really curating a book of 300 artists from around the world and their vision of art and what they do. And I wrote the foreword for it, but there was all the collaboration of getting the photographers, the artists, getting their photos. So with that, you know, if you look at that book, if you looked at that book back then, there was so much fresh ideas in it. If you go onto the internet now and Google steampunk, you will see new art that looks like that art from back then. That's 10 years. So some of it never evolved.
Yeah.
It just kept getting, you know, reborn into something else based on particular maker style or even people who write. And, but, there was something about my work that made it different from ever, you know, I'd say there were probably about 10 to 15 makers at the time that were doing anything from jewelry to large scale, art projects to clothing to, you know, but they were good at what they did and they didn't get duplicated. They didn't get copied because you can't when something, you know, it's like in the world of music. I always refer to that. It's like there are artists that all sound the same. But then there's Prince. Then there's David Bowie. There's people who just can't be replicated.
Right.
Except by maybe Weird Al Yankovic. That's a whole different thing. But you know what I mean? Like they just like you hear it and it's like, that's them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So luckily that's what my art did. It was so unique. It was not copied. And whether a lot of my stuff was based on puns just because I thought they were amusing.
Yeah.
So I built a lot of things like based on puns and they were just out there and they were purchased. And, you know, I'm lucky to have been part of that art movement when it first turned into kind of a maker's world.
Yeah.
And it still kind of shocks me that the Dr. Grymm even came to be, but it came to be and became a huge part of my life because of that movement.
Now, you said you spent a good solid 10 years doing steampunk work.
Yep.
Now, is that all sculpture and modeling, or what kind of work are you actually producing at that time?
So, when I became known as a steampunk artist, Dr. Grymm was the alias behind the stories of my work. Okay. Everything I make has a story. And that story typically revolved around a character called Dr. Grymm.
So this is a persona that you take on doing this work.
Well, yes, it wasn't necessary at first, but as I started doing it, more and more conventions and people were like, so who's Dr. Grymm? Because he's mentioned in the story, but who is he? And so I had to evolve a character. And I was like, well, what if I made that character, you know, I became that character? Because that's what a lot of steampunk is. People make up characters. Right. So for me, it was a fascination of not only the books that I read as a kid, but I also have a huge love for old Westerns. And for me, it was, I always loved the concept of like this bad guy's coming to town. Nobody knows who he is, but he's got this reputation of being a bad guy.
Yeah.
And I just by word of mouth. And so I evolved this character of Dr. Grymm into this kind of Old West mad scientist, which was something that, again, was not, those two things hadn't really been put together.
I'm thinking Doc Brown in Back to the Future 3 now.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great representation of steampunk. the stuff that Doc built in that movie from stuff that was in that period, you know. And that's one of the things besides Wild Wild West that I will actually point to as an example. Yeah. This is what steampunk is, because it is innovation, you know. But Dr. Grymm kind of evolved from that, and he was kind of an anti-hero. You know, the bigger things that I had put together that were my artwork, that were my ideas, came from the sketchbooks and little notes that I would make as a kid. Right. Okay. So as a kid.
So you held on to all that stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And a lot of that stuff, that's where it just evolved from a stupid idea at the time, or like some of my work. For instance, my older sister, when I was a kid, loved Amelia Earhart. Right. She was her idol. And so she passed away when I was young, and later in life, when I started doing steampunk, I built a machine. I built a series, but it came from that idea of, what if you took, you know, first of all, they were called brainstorm machines. So basically, Dr. Grymm would be hired by people in this alternate world to take the brains of people who were, you know, known, like Amelia Earhart or Edgar Allan Poe, and bring it back to life to get the knowledge out of it. So, but usually Dr. Grymm worked with very bad people, and he worked with them as he was pretty much karma. He was the bully against the bullies, but he never wanted anyone to know that he was good. Right. So my first big project like that was based on Amelia Earhart. And Amelia Earhart, which most people don't know, besides she wasn't just an aviator, she was actually one of 3 people that really, where GPS evolved into, came from her. And she was working with 2 other people to come up with a portable navigation for the planes. Oh, wow. So as I was reading more, you know, I love to do that. I love to read history and then just kind of tweak it a little bit to this what if. What if Amelia wasn't, you know, there's a reason why she disappeared and she wasn't found.
She's a great character for steampunk.
She is.
Marooned with whatever technology she had.
So in my story, it was basically Amelia Earhart was working for the U.S. government. She flew to Nazi Germany. She stole back all of the artifacts and stuff that they had stolen and placed them around the globe in different locations so they couldn't get it. And so she was shot down. And the Nazis at the time basically extracted her brain, gave it to Dr. Grymm to build a machine to locate where that art was put. Yeah. And it was really weird, like as a kid, even coming up with brains in a jar to begin with. But for me, there was a fascination to it of, if you had to resurrect someone's brain, how would you do it? Because I was never satisfied in the movies that a brain could just be electrified and brought back to life and it would be that person's brain. What brings back their persona, their memories? And that's what I then built into this machine. The machine was actually built, the one that I built, out of a radio, one of those old wooden standing radios from the year that she disappeared. There are pieces of the same type of plane that are all the knobs and buttons and lights come from the same plane that she disappeared in. Wow. And I had an actress and dialect coach that I met at CalArts replicate her voice from the very few recordings that she did. She had a clothing line with Macy's. So she did like 2 radio spots, and we have her voice from that. So she replicated her voice, and basically it was interactive. So you could, it was interactive, or it seemed interactive. Yeah. It blew steam. It had her brain in a jar with the aviation cap on top and a picture of her next to her plane and a typewriter key. And you could type in the latitude and longitude and you hear her brain process and tell you where that thing is. So all the latitudes and longitudes are actual to it, to like Easter Island or the Bermuda Triangle or all these places. And basically the machine was built in the story to be given to the Nazis, but where she was telling them to go were places where they would never come back from. They were paranormal locations, like the Bermuda Triangle. They would go there and disappear. So she was, she was so tenacious as a person in real life. I was like, she would be the same way after she died. Yeah. She would continue on to do the right thing.
Hey, did you actually build this machine?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's incredible.
So, and I did one with Edgar Allan Poe as well, who really, his pain and darkness and just everything that he was, I was like, all right, the dark memories that he has from his life are what would resurrect his brain.
Yeah.
And you can listen to it. So I built this machine that was basically, again, taken from history from, Rupert Griswold, who was this person who was another writer who really hated Poe for how much talent he had and did everything he could to ruin his good name. Even wrote this scandalous obituary when he died about all the things that were wrong with him. So I was like, well, that's a great premise for a story. You know, nobody knows how Poe died. Right. So I'm going to introduce this. And so the machine is basically, in short, Grymm was hired by this guy to put his brain in a jar so he would have it and he could continue writing in his style and would become famous. And in real life, this guy died penniless and insane, but nobody knew why. So my link to the story was, well, what if he got the machine, he listened to it, he became insane by listening to Poe, because Poe now doesn't know whether the stories he wrote were real or just stories. So he became insane by using
kind of living
machine.
in the telltale heart at that point.
Exactly.
So you create this whole persona and give him a history tied to actual historical events. Mm-hmm. And you take these stories in kind of dark places. Mm-hmm. Is that tied to your love of the monsters, you think? Like, because you said you had this, alongside all the Warner Brothers cartoons and everything, you also had the Frankenstein's monster and things like that. Do you feel like maybe that's where the dark side of yours, because you said there was a science fiction-y and there's a dark part. So I'm just wondering why, how you gravitated in that direction. Yeah,
I think so to answer that, we have to go back into my personal history a bit, in that I didn't have the best childhood. I had a fairly traumatic childhood. Everything was like in life, everything's fine, and then it's not. So my sister passed away at a young age, and she was the other artist in the family. She was the one who gave me my love for reading, turned me on to so many different things. Kiss. She was very quiet. She was like an introvert. And very quiet and very nerdy, but she had this secret love for Kiss, and she introduced me to them. Okay. And that was like, wow, that's really awesome. The costumes, the theatricalness of it. Alice Cooper, same thing. And so I had some of that in there too. But after she passed away and my family kind of broke apart in a very violent way, I lived in an abusive alcoholic household. I couldn't escape from it. My escape was my art. Yeah. My escape was making monsters, I think that was one of the things that turned me onto, making monsters. Was I was afraid of everything as a kid. Like I just had a fear of, that was just constant. It was always with me. And some of that followed me into my adulthood that I still deal with today. But, one of the first horror movies I saw was Jaws, right? So Jaws was like, it's still to this day one of my favorite films.
It's still one of the best movies probably ever made.
And but the terror and the fear that comes from it is one of those things that I was fascinated by at the time. And I looked up as much as I could about it. And the reason why is because I wanted to overcome the fear. So knowing that there are people out there that make this stuff, that's what turned me on to making monsters, knowing that, yes, of course, sharks are real, but in this film, everything that they did to make this film what it was, came from artists. Yeah. And, at a young age, I think that was besides my sister, that was like after she passed, it was like, well, how do I do this? How do I make art? And that was one of the things I was introduced to. So watching, which at the time was very hard to do, finding like the making of The Exorcist, the making of Jaws.
Yeah, no YouTube at the time.
Right. So you got to search that stuff out, but learning about Dick Smith and his makeup and going further back to the Universal monsters and how they made that. I was really into that stuff as a kid
because
it helped me overcome my fear of horror movies or, whatever was going on in my own personal life.
If you create the monster, then you control the monster, right?
Right. So that's basically where I took it. I would say I'm a much better, healthier minded person over the past few years from finding the right therapist, from getting, the wrong depression meds out of my system, from really working on myself from within. EMDR has been a huge part of my creative process too. And what it turned into was that, I make creature costumes. So outside of the steampunk realm, I've always created monsters for the reason, just what you said, you can control them if you created the monster. But there's also that kind of side thought from my childhood of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, in that sometimes you just can't control the monster. So what I evolved into as an artist, especially with the monsters, the monsters that I make and the steampunk stuff that I made was very personal to me. And some of it had humor, but a lot of it had darkness, and some of them had both, because that's what you kind of need to overcome the darkness. So I ended up, like with my monsters, translating events from my past, traumatic events, into a physical form of a creature. So its backstory would have something to do with how that emotion evolved. And then I make the monster, thereby taking the monster out of my head, making it a physical entity that I can control. Either by wearing it, performing in it, having someone else perform in it. But the important part is taking it out and not having it burden me inside anymore.
The story behind the monster, is that a story that you're not pulling it whole cloth from your personal history, I'm guessing, right?
No, it's kind of
something that's evolving as you're building the creature, or?
No, I kind of know. Like, I know that, all right, this, what motivates this creature to do what it does? Because the thing is about my creatures, for the most part, as I build a monster suit, which typically I have a client that wants me to build a monster suit for, like, say, a haunted house. And to them, it's just, I designed it and here it is. But I need a backstory behind it, or else I can't get that emotion to it, especially if I'm performing in it. So if we take one of the creatures I love the most that I made was the Harvester. And the Harvester is a steampunk scarecrow, for lack of a better term. And I had to kind of fit it into the story of where it was going to be, which was in Tarrytown in Sleepy Hollow, in the real Sleepy Hollow. So I was like, all right, if they had a monster that was built there, and you go back into history, like what could you do with it? And there was slave ownership at the time. And so I basically evolved a story around what was going on at the time on that plantation and evolved it into this monster. But the thing about it is that this monster is ferocious as it can be. And I mean, this comes down to even the sound effects that I create for it. I physically make sound effects that are unique to this monster.
So the creature costume itself makes sound effects separate from the performer. Wow.
Yeah. Okay. It's, it basically, I mean, we can get into that part after, but it's lights and sound and everything else. Like that's how it's unique. That creature is unique. It's not something it's store bought.
Right.
But the background of it certainly is it's in pain. It was tortured and it's in pain. And so there's a part of it that's just sad, and you hear it come up every once in a while, and then it gets overwhelmed and overpowered and it goes into a rage, and then it shuts down. And when it comes back, it's just replaying its own trauma over and over. And that serves as two purposes for me as a performer. There's a 20-minute loop inside that creature and I perform to it, to what it's doing. But no matter where I am, I can always alter my performance to act like it sounds like I'm triggering the sound effects and not the other way around.
Right.
But there are also triggered sound effects that happen, like the metal footsteps, and the mechanics of it are timed they do whatever I do when I walk. So if I walk fast, they go faster. So there's different sound elements to it. There's a lot of forethought that goes into everything, every little detail of the creation of this.
Is this stuff that you learned studying theme park design? Like, how did you develop this skill set?
I honestly don't know.
So
it's it is, but I think it's just part of who I am. It's part of the storytelling aspect. I know the details are there, but nobody else does. Right. So, when I'm in a creature costume like the Harvester, I don't break character. Yeah. I am the monster at that point, and I'm not using my voice. It's doing everything that it needs to do, and I react to it, and I'm puppeteering it too.
Yeah.
So I have to use my entire body to make it do what it does. So when it roars, it's not just me opening my mouth, it's me moving my entire head to make the jaw move. It's all those little things that I think, I don't know where I learned it. I was inspired by Jim Henson and his entire crew growing up. I am inspired by Guillermo del Toro in his design aspect and his storytelling.
That guy's amazing.
I'm connected to people that are just, Guillermo del Toro also grew up in a horrible childhood, and his stories are a mixture of fantasy and pain, and everything relates back to him. So there are just, I think, people in this world that, writers, musicians, I mean, it's not that they learned it somewhere. It's just they learn to use their emotion in a better way, in a creative way, as their outlet, and they continue to do so. And that's what makes them different. So.
But where do you get the idea for the monsters though? I mean, is this all stuff that you come up with? It's time to build a creature.
Right.
So here's the story that this creature is going to embody, or do people come to you and say, I need this monster for this event?
Right. It depends on the monster. It depends on the business opportunity. Yes. Sometimes, like a lot of the creatures that I built in the past are for, the Sleepy Hollow haunt, the Horseman's Hollow.
Okay.
So I worked there for 7 years designing monsters and stuff. So with that, their haunt is very, you have to stay within the period and the look of it, which is not typical of a haunted house, right? So we're talking about the age of when, the Headless Horseman and Irvin Washington wrote that story.
Right.
So he wrote a lot of different stories that were also about demonology and witchcraft and not just the Headless Horseman for what he's known for. So we had some playability here to build something that, like, all right, what was there at the time? And every year they kind of pushed the timeline a little bit depending on, what they could do with it. So the nice thing is that this was right before vehicles in New York, and like just the Industrial Revolution was just about to start. So I had steam power behind me. So I was like, all right, well, this scarecrow, as it would be, is mechanical, but there's also someone in it. There's basically a test subject in it that was built like a Frankenstein's monster.
Okay.
My story behind it was, all right, they had this plantation. They needed, the slaves, the workers there to produce more, to do more. So I was inspired, which I did another project based on, the legend of John Henry. I kind of went with that, and I evolved it a little bit, that what if they could take one of the slaves.
There's a steampunk story for you.
Yeah. And, what if you took somebody and made it into this creature that all it did was harvest? Like, that's all it did. It wouldn't stop. And, the white, caretakers of the land at that time had the money to do it. They hired Dr. Grymm to make somebody, and that somebody, their consciousness was still in the monster and the pain, and ended up beheading all of them in the night. And he didn't want to do it, but the part of the monster that they wanted him to become, kind of made him do it. So he's stuck with that image, and he's got their heads all over. He's got all the heads of the landowners on him.
Wow.
And so it was something that was like, how can I make this, weirdly dark, but still fits in with that? So they came to me just to say, hey, we need a creature. And some of the creatures I had built were tree demons. They were demons that, this land has been sullied. Washington Irving wrote about demonology. So what if the land tried to take itself back from the people who built on it?
Yeah.
So I invented these tree creatures that came of the same trees that are on the property. So in saying that, like, again, I'm really detail focused and really a nerd. So it's a matter of going there and taking pictures of the trees and then replicating the bark so that they look like they belong in that forest that surrounds it.
Yeah.
So, but the people will come to me and say, I just need a monster. And I'm like, do you have anything specific? And most of the time it's no. So I get to play around with that, and I have this kind of like just sketch pads of monsters because that's what I do.
Well, I mean, you've got a clay head on the table right now, right?
Right.
So what is the inspiration behind, because this looks like something that's in its relatively early stages.
It is.
And it looks terrifying so far.
Thank you. This actually was, so one of the every couple of years I strive to make a new monster. And that monster is something that I need to outdo the last monster. I need to add more to it. I need to make it bigger. I need to make it more impressive. And that's just for me.
Yeah.
Because I'm also evolving my skill set. And there's constantly, like in the world of cosplay, there are new materials that you can use now that weren't available even 5 years ago. So it's like, all right, I'm going to utilize that. So with my process, my new creature that I'm building is kind of a cybergenic demon.
Oh.
I don't know if it's going to have more steam-powered aspect to it or if it's actually just going to be more industrial. I'm still playing around with that. But, I've got the structure of how the body will be built and this one, for instance, doesn't necessarily have a story yet.
Okay.
So this one might evolve, but right now it's fear. That's what it runs on.
I can see that.
And it actually will have a brain in a jar on its backpack that's actually powering it. And whoever that brain is that's in there is a horrible person. So, so it's something that, it's taking mechanical and nature and mixing it together. The creature's head that's sitting here, I'm still playing around with what the facial features need to look like. So, as I'm also a sculptor, usually the projects will start either by pen on paper or if I can't get the right look that I'm seeing in my head on paper, I'll break out the clay and I'll just start sculpting. Yeah. And eventually the shape and the form will come to me. One of the things that I do that I learned early on, at CalArts, is the importance of silhouette, right? So all of my creatures have a very specific silhouette. So you don't know if you were to see it standing at the end of a trail, backlit, and you don't understand what that form is, your brain automatically goes into fear mode because it can't figure out what the shape is that they're looking at. So if it just looks like the shape of a person, not as scary. If it looks like something that has lots of weapons on it and is just malshapen, then, it's like I play around. I don't like things symmetrical. I like to play around with, making both sides of it look a little bit funky, but that also lends into the fear of, I don't know what that thing is. My brain doesn't know what that is. So I'm afraid of it. So I try to do that in the pen and ink, area. And then also when I translate it to sculpture, I'll do a miniature sculpture and kind of block out, the frame of the head, the bone work, the muscle. And then eventually it gets translated into foam. In a 1:1 scale. So this creature eventually will probably be about 8.5 feet tall.
Holy cow.
So, I'll utilize stilts, but I also utilize just its head is above my head. All my creatures are much taller than me. I'm kind of a short, stocky guy.
Hey, you're taller than me, so let's back off on that a little bit.
But no, I mean, as far as like them being imposing, the harvester is imposing because he doesn't stop moving. He keeps, it's not his height. It's just his actions are very precise, to how he moves, and he doesn't stop. So when I was saying I stay in character, if somebody talks to me, I don't understand what they're saying. I don't understand what people say.
Right.
I'm either in a good mood when you talk to me, or I'm in a bad mood when you talk to me. And I use that energy to, it's therapy. It's monster therapy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, but people love that. Like it's kind of different to be in a position where it's like in most haunted houses, like if somebody, like today, people just stop for selfies. Can I get a selfie with you? And my monster is just like, get the hell away from me sometimes. But sometimes he will tilt his head and nod yes slightly, and then just be okay. So they can take a picture real quick, but there's things like that it adds to the realism of the monster. And I think coming from the process that I use and the natural process of this could be a living thing.
Yeah.
That's what's important to me.
Do you process while you're performing as these monsters? Do you process the reaction that people are having in relation to the craft that you have put into it? Like, are you able to recognize the appreciation that people have for the creation you have put forth?
I do, sort of. It depends on which monster I'm in.
Okay.
And that's simply because of, can I hear them? Like the Harvester, for instance, has a sound system inside of it, behind me, in front of me, and on my waist. So I can't normally even hear people unless they're right here. But I can see them. I can see the reaction that they have.
Yeah.
And some people are they're either, oh my God, that's awesome, or get that the hell away from me. Right.
Which is awesome by itself, right?
Yeah. Either one will work, so I do see that. And I think with some of my older tree creatures that I'd perform in, some were built for other people, but I would be with them as a different person. So I could see their reaction to the thing. And yeah, it definitely helps, in the fact of what do I do with my next one?
Yeah.
What do I need to improve? How do I need to improve the movability? Or is it too hot? Is it, those things come into play also, but definitely the reaction of people is what I look for.
Do you feel a sense of satisfaction or gratification from those reactions at the time? Or does that come later? I mean, do you?
It's kind of weird for me. That's kind of a weird subject.
Okay.
If you want me to go into it, but because of who I am as an artist and because of the background that I have, and this is something that gets brought up in therapy quite a bit. I'm never actually happy with what I create. Now, that may sound over dramatic, or maybe, no artist likes what they do. I don't make art to be happy. I appreciate that other people appreciate it. That's what it's there for. Like, to me, it's not a matter of like, I finished it and awesome, I feel great. I don't feel bad, but I'm like, all right, now I'm going to just perform in this and that's that. What I think is important about it is that the artwork inspires someone else to make something.
Yeah.
That's what makes me feel good. The word happy doesn't mean too much to me. It's something that I kind of stay away from, because it's to me, happiness is fleeting, whereas being content and being, it's like there's many more emotions that I think that I'd like to get from my art than just happy. And so I don't see it that way.
Do you get that emotional response that you are looking for from doing this?
It's taken a while. I think the first time I ever felt some sort of accomplishment for what I did was with the Harvester, and it was because somebody captured it on video. So, when you're playing a monster, when you're a performer as a monster, I envision how I think it's moving, and I'm hoping that it's translating that way. that it feels like a real creature, that it's very twitchy and it's very like depending on its mood or what sound effects coming out. And somebody recorded me, and it was just a very brief video. It's on my Facebook. But that little 2-minute video, if that, and when I saw it, I was like, that's exactly how I wanted it to move. I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And I felt pride and an accomplishment that I hadn't felt with any of my other work.
Yeah.
And I mean any of my other work. So that was just a few years ago. So that was definitely, it's something that I'm working on, that I feel the same energy that people see when they see it.
Yeah.
You know, so I definitely want to keep making art, but it was never for the purpose of, you know, oh, I think this is awesome, we just need more of this. It's not that. It's not that at all.
So we've been talking about monsters for a while, but I want to talk about the Demons Project.
Okay.
For a few minutes.
Okay.
Because this is something where, I mean, you're using creativity to sort of channel through personal challenges, not just for yourself, but for other people who maybe share the same sense of aesthetic or go through some of the same challenges, right?
Right.
So tell me what the project is,
Okay.
what the goal is.
So the Demon Project was something that has been evolving since my childhood, and it's a very personal project to me. It's like one of my kids. But when I was, after my sister passed away, before she passed away, she gave me a journal, and she told me, this is where you're going to write your adventure. And she passed away shortly after that. My life kind of turned into turmoil at home. And I started having a series of nightmares. So I started writing those nightmares in this journal, and I filled it. And it had silhouettes of creatures and just weird words that I like came up and I just put in there. It's just a mismatch of like chaos. But I finished it, and I just put the journal away and never thought about it again.
Finished it? You mean just filled the pages?
I filled the book.
Okay.
I filled the book at this thing, and I didn't remember it until, God, I think 10 years ago, maybe, or a little, not as far back, but eventually what happened is this book found its way back to me. It used to be in my childhood home. Somebody found it. Somebody mailed it to me. I never figured out who did it, but it found its way to me. And when I looked at it, immediately upon opening it, I was like, this means something, you know, that in that total Close Encounters sort of way.
Did you recognize it immediately?
Yeah. I just forgot about it. But I started going through it and paging through it, and it's like, this doesn't make any sense. And even the you know, it keeps mentioning demons, and they're spelled Daemons, which I was like, that's not how you spell demons. Like, but as my 10-year-old me, I mean, it looked like it probably spanned from like 10 to 13. So it was like, none of this makes sense to me, but it means something. So long story short, I took it and I started to translate it into, you know, my adult, like, this is what I think it is. And a story evolved from it. And this story was basically, what I thought it was from my translation was that there were 13 female creatures that all represent what makes up a human. Specifically like knowledge, chaos, love, the things that make us what we are. Each one of these creatures, which were it looked like they evolved from trees, were responsible for the evolution of what humans became at the beginning of time.
This sounds like mental faculties.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. How our brain functions. And the more I read and the more I translated, and, you know, it started to make more sense. These 13 things that these creatures are all things that I have struggled with through my life. And the other part of it was that it was they seem to represent either the right side of the brain or the left side of the brain. Like there's some sort of story in there that, what I worked into, as I was translating it, that our brains are constantly at war with one another. If you take the word knowledge and you say it to someone, they could either think it's positive or negative, or chaos, positive or negative. But what if they weren't? What if they were both the same?
Yeah.
And we just, through evolution and through our upbringing, assigned good or bad.
Right. Value neutral.
Right.
Right.
So that's what I think the book was about. It was kind of a key to unlocking why my brain is at war with itself. You know, the depression, the PTSD, all of the things that were traumas that happened through my life. It seemed to be a message from my younger self of this is how to fix it. So I became just super fascinated with it and learning more and getting textbooks and learning about other people, using the words, like giving them the word and what does this mean to you? Mm-hmm. You know, and what the end goal with it is to eventually make a book. And this book is a fantasy book. This book will be, tied to Dr. Grymm. It's kind of the final project of Dr. Grymm and what happened to him after I retired him, because I stopped playing Dr. Grymm and I stopped performing. But the story kind of lent itself to it. I wanted to make a self-help book that wasn't seen as a self-help book. So if somebody artistic were to pick this up and they see this kind of, you know, this is Dr. Grymm's final project, and you're looking at basically his workbench of everything that he's found by, you know, he's having nightmares. There's a machine that allows him to see into his dreams and record them, and he keeps building it and evolving it so it becomes more powerful, that he can tether things to our world. And what was it that, you know, it's basically mimicking what happened to me as a kid, but in a fantasy world. Okay. So as an adult character, and this character's arc, he finally overcomes his fear of himself through the book. So if you were somebody, if I do this correctly, if I get to the end of this project, which there's many layers to it, there's, the designs are there, writing the book, you know, it's kind of like a field guide, if you will, to these creatures and what he's learned. It will either, artists will see it and think it's cool because it's art.
Right.
But other people, if they are paying attention to it, there's actually clues in it to help you find the neutral zone in your own head.
Yeah.
So you're not at war with yourself anymore. I mean, the book starts off with what essentially is a suicide note, because he knows he's not getting to the end of this alive if he wants to find out the answers. And it's got a very dark side to it, but it also has hope. And if you can make it to the end and figure out what the clue is, which I won't say here because I want people to find it on their own, there's actually a very literal thing to do with the book that will show you the answers that you're looking for if you're looking hard enough. Oh. So there's a trick to it. There's a twist. So, so with that being said, like I want to take the art. I want to have a gallery show with the art. I've worked with models to create physical versions. Oh,
so you're making
demons.
Like creature costumes for each of the 13.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So some of them are already on, the website, the Facebook page. But I've assigned different models to different creatures. And the fun thing about it for me is people were drawn to wanting to work on the project. I say models because, and then they're not, some of them are just people. They're just women that want to play this creature because something attracts them to it.
Yeah.
You know, that's their problem too. Vanity, empathy, things like that. They want to play that creature because they believe that it will help them realize something that they need.
Playing the creature, what does that entail? Is it a photo shoot? I mean, what?
Yeah, basically it would be a photo shoot. I would make the prosthetics for them. I would work with them to kind of design how it looks to them too, because it's very collaborative.
Yeah.
You know, it's very much like, here's what this creature is to me. what can you bring to the table to add to it? You know, how do you feel about it?
Right.
What are the colors it should have? Like what, you know, so that makes it so that it's there's some sort of ownership to it. And I really want that. I want that outside voice to, because it'll help the reach of the book. It'll help in how it reaches people, I should say.
Okay.
Not necessarily in sales. So when they become the creature and I do the makeup on them, I do the prosthetics, I do the costume, and then that either gets shot into a location that looks like it's a location from the book, or there's post effects that get added to it or whatever. And then there's the whole layout of the book itself, all the drawings, so it feels like it's a field guide. Like you're literally every page of the book is the workbench of Dr. Grymm with everything laid out on it that he has learned about this particular sister.
Yeah.
And, you know, that may go on for several pages, and he moves stuff and he's testing it and he's learning more about it. So there's a lot of imagery that goes into it, along with the writing of, you know, is this book even in the right order? We don't know. There's something wrong with it that you can fix. You as the reader can fix. And that's what makes it that intricate. So, I will take those images and I want to do an art show. Mm-hmm. My exhibits that I typically do, like I've done steampunk exhibits and I work with different artists. This would be a solo show. In essence, well, not necessarily. It would have the photographers. Everybody worked on it.
Right.
But I also want some of the women there portraying the demons, like during the opening of the art show. But you'll see them on mannequins at least. And I want you to feel like you as the guest of the art show are walking into that world. Yeah. Like Dr. Grymm has literally built a portal so you can come in and safely see their world.
Will you bring Dr. Grymm out of retirement?
I won't actually. There's a video that we're going to produce that will be kind of a 5-minute explanation of what happened to him.
Okay.
But he's gone. And that's it. I physically, through my own therapy, mm-hmm. have relinquished my connection to Dr. Grymm.
Okay.
And he has disappeared. But the video will show what happened to him.
So this is a fully realized project.
Yeah.
Like, you know, every step in this process.
Except for the date of when everything will be done. Yes, absolutely. Okay. This has been like something that I've been working on for years as far as the designs and things, and I've done tests with the models. And so, you know, I would like to put a deadline on it, and I have, but that deadline always moves because life gets in the way, and it's not something that's funded. If it were something that's funded, that's different. But right now it's just me doing this and the people who have volunteered their time to do it graciously. But I think, you know, at least within the next 5 years, I would like to have that art show. And the art show will be the catalyst for actually making the book come to print.
Well, that sounds incredible. I'm hoping I'll be able to be at that show when it finally happens.
Me too. Me too.
So do you have anything else that you're working on these days?
Right now I am, it's kind of monster season.
Yeah.
You know,
coming up into fall pretty soon.
Yeah, the haunts are coming up. So, working on a new creature for myself, doing some work with, the haunted graveyard at Lake Compounce, and creating some creatures for them, and, some stuff for the Sleepy Hollow in Tarrytown, and really just kind of, I've spent the last 9 months just focusing on a day job. So I'm going back into doing my art again.
Those freaking day jobs ruin everything.
They do. They really do. I mean, they're great for food and stuff.
Yeah.
And paying for clothes and kids. Not in that order. But, but I've, you know, after I left the steampunk world and doing that and just doing artwork for that amount of time, like just doing art, you know, I took a break away and I got a day job because I had a new baby. And, you know, I've always been able to carry both, do a day job and then do art almost full time as well. Because I also taken jobs doing consulting work and graphic design and whatever will come along. But, I need my art
Yeah.
in my world, or else I'm just not me.
That's as important as food sometimes.
It is. It is. I mean, especially for how I use it and how I utilize my art. It's my sanity.
Yeah.
It's my escape away, but it's also the thing that I use to make me a better me.
Yeah.
So, without sounding too cheesy, but that's the absolute truth.
That seems to be universally true for pretty much everyone who considers themselves an artist.
Yes.
Thank you so much for talking with me. That
You're
was
welcome.
Really, really great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
One more great big thank you to Joey Marsocci for coming on the show, and thank you for listening. Now be sure to visit GrymmStudios.com to take a look at Joey's work for yourself. Halloween is right around the corner, so maybe you'll catch one of Joey's creatures in your area. You can also follow Grymm Studios on Instagram at Grymm Studios to keep up with his ongoing projects. All right, that's it for this week. Don't forget to leave those ratings and reviews, and if you haven't already subscribed to the pod, make sure you do that. It's free, and it's the best way to make sure that new episodes show up in your feed when they are released. If you have a question or a comment for me, you can email tabletostage@gmail.com, or you can shoot me a message on Facebook, Twitter, or on Instagram. Thank you for listening. Until next time, keep creating.